All right, we are going to be looking at Chapter 10, which is entitled Character Development. There's an old theater saying that says there are no small roles, only small actors. And the point of that is that every role, whether you have no lines, just a few lines, or a lot of lines, is very important to a play. I have seen personally at contests where actors with few or no lines won awards because they just were so good in their role, even though they were not a major character. So all roles are important. No matter what size your role, you will need to develop your character in detail, and that's what we're going to be looking at in this chapter, is how to do that. Make sure that you have gone through in Google Classroom and done the theater terms that you're required to do and turn those in for a grade. All right, let's go ahead and start looking at what the chapter has to say. Now in Chapter 9, we learned how to analyze a character's internal and external traits, their motivation, their objectives, all of those things. But when you act in a play, you have to understand the relationship your character has to the play as a whole. In other words, you've got to understand how you fit in that story. Okay? So you have to do a thorough study of the play's other characters, the play's plot, the play's structure, the play's theme, all of those things that will help give you the tools so that you can portray your character in a way that comes close to what the playwright intended when he or she wrote the play. So, one of the things you want to make sure you do is stay in style. As an actor on stage, you must understand the style and tone of the play you're performing. Plays can be realistic or non-realistic. A play that's realistic imitates real life. It shows recognizable characters in dramatic situations. That means that it's something that either has happened or could happen in real life. That is a realistic play. And here are some examples. We're not going to talk about those. But typically, realistic plays utilize the convention of the fourth wall. Basically, they get on the stage, and they pretend like the audience is not there. Like there's this imaginary wall between them and the audience, and they do not break that fourth wall. So it's like they're just there on their own, and they're in their own little world, and they don't even know that the audience is out there. Okay? It's like there's an imaginary wall. This kind of play is performed in a representational style. In other words, they're not addressing the audience. They don't look at the audience. They don't address the audience. They just pretend like the audience is not there. Now, in a non-realistic play, the characters and or situations are exaggerated or depart from real life. So non-realistic plays can be some kind of fantasy where the plants and the animals talk, or where there are fairies or something like that, where aliens come down. It could be something science fiction type, or where zombies are. Anything like that would be non-realistic. There can even be plays that are pretty realistic but don't come out in a realistic way. Sometimes you might see a romantic story that is always perfect in the way that it ends. And you know life is not perfect, so that would be non-realistic. In these kinds of plays, dreams come true. The language is often poetic. It's just not realistic. A lot of Shakespeare's plays, especially Midsummer Night's Dream, would be a non-realistic play. Now, in many non-realistic plays, actors use a presentational or direct address approach where they actually talk directly to the audience or they address the audience. I think about The Office. If you watch The Office, you know what I'm talking about. There are times in The Office when Jim directly looks into the camera and makes a face and he acknowledges the audience is present. That's presentational. And then we know that they go sit in the conference room and then they're interviewed by them and they talk directly to the audience. That's presentational. In a non-realistic play, that happens sometimes. Realistic plays, that does not generally happen. Okay? Now, we want to talk about plot and structure. And this is, by the way, a picture from a play called The Yellow Boat. And it's about a playwright's son who died from AIDS many, many years ago. And he wrote a play about it. And that's kind of the story of it. It's a kind of a non-realistic play in the way it's presented, although the story is very real. Now, in the plot and structure, you need to analyze your character effectively. You've got to analyze the play's plot, the play's structure, etc. Plays are structured like any other novel or book or anything like that. It's made up of a series of incidents linked by a theme. It has a conflict or a struggle that's revealed through the action. It leads to the dramatic turning point or the climax, and then to a logical conclusion or resolution. So let's look at the different traditional play structure. In order to really understand drama, an actor must understand the importance of a play's structure. The structure of a play is what holds together the character's actions and words. By analyzing the elements of a story structure, the actor has important insight into the plot, the theme, and his character's motivations. So here are the elements. Conflict. As you know, in most plays, the plot is built around a conflict. If you don't have a conflict, It's going to be a boring story. A conflict is created when a character has an objective, something they want or need, and they encounter an obstacle which causes the conflict. The conflict may be between characters. It may be between a character and some object or event, or it can be between a character and the character's inner self. It might even be between a character and God or something like that. Your job as an actor is to assess your character's role in the conflict and determine how your character should act and react as the conflict intensifies. Then you have what's called the rising action or the complications. These are additional events that come out of the conflict. It could be more conflicts. It could be wrinkles in the conflict. It could be whatever. But it's going to be, see how this goes up like that? Rising action. It's building and building in its intensity as it heads towards the turning point or the climax of the story. Then eventually you get to the turning point. It's usually towards the end of the play. It's the highest point of emotional intensity in the drama. The main character will take an action that will lead to an end to the conflict. It may not go in his or her favor, but it may. Okay? All the play's action leads to this point. Basically, this is the turning point, the climax. The actor is going to, the character is going to make a decision that's going to bring a resolution in one way or the other. And that's where the highest emotional intensity of the play is. Then you also have what's called the falling action. This is where things are working themselves out. It's sometimes called the denouement. And that leads to the resolution where all the complications are worked out, the conclusion is reached, etc. It does not have to be a conclusion or a resolution that is necessarily good for the actor, but it could be, okay, for the character. Now, we want to talk about mood. The mood of the play is its emotional texture. The audience should sense the play's mood early on during the rise in action. Nearly every aspect of the play contributes to the mood, from the characters to the plot to the design elements. Everything works to help kind of set the mood of that play. When you look at this is a picture from a play called The Death of a Salesman. And you can tell just by looking at that picture, the way they did the lighting, the way he's standing, the way everything is dark except for that one light coming from on the other side of the actor, that the mood there is very deflated, it's very depressed, it's very sad, okay? When you have studied the plot, mood, and structure of the play or scene in which you've been cast, you can at last begin to focus on your character and how he or she fits into the play, okay? When you read the play once to understand its elements, read it again to identify with your specific role. Visualize the action through your character's eyes. Understand your character's behavior and dialogue in view of his or her motivation. Now, how do you work on characterization? In previous chapters, you learned that making observations, drawing upon your own experience, using your imagination, all of those things, investigating the character's internal and external traits help you understand the character. To concentrate on knowing your character through and through, use the steps below as you memorize the script. Concentrate on your character's internal and external traits. Go back to pages 92 and 93 if you need help with that, or let me know and I'll help you. Discover ways in which your character is like you, determine how the character is not like you, research aspects that are unknown to you, etc. Next, have a clear sense of what happened to your character before the events depicted in the play, as well as what goes on in places in the play where there's not much of a script, where it kind of skips time. Some actors make complete histories of their character's family life, employment, friendships, alliances, etc. Ask yourself what your character wants and what does he or she do to get it. Okay, that's your objectives and your tactics. Okay? Figure out whose side your character's on. Are you the central character? Does your character oppose the central character? Is your character assist the central character? Etc. In addition to the dialogue, that's what your character says, pay attention to the stage directions, the instructions about where you should move, what you should do. That gives you clues into your character. Okay? Pay attention to what the other characters say about your character, how they behave toward him or her. Think about how your character changes over the course of time. We call that the character arc. You know, your character should develop over time. You should not be a flat character that stays the same. You should develop. Remember that plays like real life are mostly about what is not said. We call that the subtext. So the dialogue of play can be compared to the tip of the iceberg. It's just the beginning of it. But there's the body language. There's the way things are said, the tone, etc., that leads us to understand what's being said but not really being said out loud. Okay, it's called the subtext. The character may say, I hate you, I'm leaving, and proceed to stay on stage. Well, apparently they don't hate them too bad, and apparently they're not leaving. So the subtext tells us there's something else going on besides that person being hated and that person leaving. Okay? So keep those things in mind. Pay attention to your character's rhythms. Does he or she speak in a staccato, short, choppy sentences, or long, fluid sentences, that kind of stuff? That gives you a clue to how your character should move. Now, over here in this little yellow box, it talks about loving your character. Acting teachers tell their students they must love their characters. That means you must respect, understand, and empathize with them to bring life to the role. It does not mean that you as a person would make the same choices they make. It does not mean that you would make do the same things they did, etc. You might not even approve of your character's actions. Sometimes if you're the good guy, it's fun to play the bad guy. Sometimes if you're the bad guy, it's good to play the fun guy, the good guy sometimes. Just keep that in mind. Be fascinated by your character and love your character. If you don't, nobody else will. Now, let's look at cues and cue pickup. We'll be done. Cues are the last few words of the speech that precede yours. In other words, it's what tells you it's your turn to talk. Sometimes a sound or movement will be your cue, but you take your cue from someone else's lines most of the time. A cue pickup is when you actually start saying your lines. So pick up your cues at the correct time. Make sure you take a breath before it's your turn to speak, before the other actor has finished speaking, so that when it's your turn, you can come right in on time. You need to have quick cue pickup. That means that you need to go, as soon as they finish, you need to be starting. Because if you don't, it's going to lag and the audience is going to get bored. You do not want to do that. Vary your lines according to the ideas and emotions that it expresses. Don't anticipate your cue. In other words, don't jump ahead. If you know that somebody's going to knock at the door, don't look at the door before they actually knock. That's anticipating your cue. Okay? Don't pick up the phone before it rings or whatever. Okay? If someone says that, if the script indicates that there's an interrupted sentence, in other words, one actor's cutting off another, make sure you have, if you're the one being cut off, that you have lines prepared so that if they don't cut you off like they're supposed to, you don't just stop talking. That doesn't make sense. So be prepared. Okay? And I believe that is going to be all. So let me know if you have any questions.